And what I'm going to share is a real use case. It's a story of a consulting job. I know Simon hates consultants, but this was one of the consulting engagements that I got when I worked for the Image Forum. We are called to a rather small company, perhaps 1,000 of employees. They were having issues with their strategy. As I have said, this is a real use case, but it has been anonymized, and I had to change the industry in which it was operated. I took a lot of effort to make sure that the relationships and the plausibility is still there. If you discover who it was, congratulations, please don't say it loudly. So the entry point, when they have called us or contacted us, it was after they have completed the online course for Wardley Mapping, and they said something like this: we are producing Kevlar clothes. As you know, perhaps not, I don't know how much you are into riding bicycles. Kevlars are quite useful for building or producing clothes or protective clothes which are resistant to abrasion. So when you are riding a bike and you have a crash, you will not destroy your skin. And so they were in the business of producing those clothes. And I think the market was like the entire European Union, and they were thinking about going to other markets. But they were facing a challenge, because it turns out that while Kevlar is really, really great, it's thick and heavy, and nylon, while it's a little bit weaker, it provides better protection from abrasion. So in the market, when they've operated, it worked slightly better. It's thinner, lighter, and it doesn't preserve heat as much as Kevlar. The result was that they have lost around 80% of the entire market, not geographically, but in terms of volumes, over a decade. There was an opportunity for them because suppliers who provided liquid Kevlar to them wanted to go up in the value chain, and they wanted to acquire their factory together with the design services to diversify, let's say, their operations. And at the same time, they have discovered that there is circular economy on the horizon, and they will be responsible for gathering this Kevlar clothes back and utilizing it, which, as you can imagine, isn't a simple task, or it wasn't a simple task, because it was easy to sell Kevlar clothes, but it wasn't easy to gather them back and to utilize them in one place or at distributed locations. And the challenge was that they were in a 2-year-long decisive process at the owner level, because the sale of the company was irreversible, and they had no alternative investment. So if they would have made mistake, there was no recovery, and they would lose quite a lot of money. Now they owned the company. They had their personal, let's say, wealth invested in it. So for them, it was a really important issue. And at the same time, because of this mounting pressure here, and because of this opportunity, which could be like once in a lifetime or once in a decade opportunity, they thought they were pressured into making the decision right now and right here. This 2-year-long decisive impasse didn't really help them in arriving to any solution. So I was contracted for a single-day workshop, perhaps a few follow-up calls, to figure out what or whether Wardley Mapping can help in their situation. And what I'm going to share with you is more or less how the process looked like and what were the results. It's highly unlikely that I will use the entire hour. Perhaps we'll have some time for the discussion. So first of all, we started with trying to understand how their landscape looks like and what is really happening in their industry. And what they have told me, and the map was pretty much that complicated, was that they were producing protective clothes, they were using Kevlars, and then there came those nasty nylon companies and grabbed the market from them. 80% over a decade, the remaining 20% was still extremely attractive. So it was worth staying for them in this market for this niche or for the leftovers, because you can't use any other word, for the leftovers, and they still would make a decent money. They had a little bit of problem with selling this part of the company because they thought they had nothing else to invest money in. And this was like a major showstopper in the discussion, because whenever they have arrived to any particular decision, there was always the question, and what if we are wrong? And this reset conversation at least a dozen of times. So the first step that we have made, we try to evaluate the first and most important hope for the future, which was like, we will get the market back. Now, if you are a little bit into Wardley Mapping, you probably recognize the product-to-product transition that is happening in this particular space. So it was a somewhat dark moment in the workshop, but what they have realized is that if the process of transition from Kevlar has been already in the progress for 10 years, it's highly unlikely that they will be able to turn over and win this market back. Those things simply doesn't happen, and even if they happen, the chance of it happening is so small that it's not worth betting your entire wealth on it. It actually makes sense to invest some pocket money, which you can afford to lose, but doesn't mean betting everything on it. And what they've also said is that they could perhaps create a slightly improved, or actually significantly improved production process, which would reverse things happening in the market. They thought it was possible, but then what we have tried to do, we have evaluated the money behind the research. As I have said, the 20% of this market was still very attractive. So those companies that here providing that type of clothes were trying to make nylon good enough to replace Kevlar in this particular space too. And when we have evaluated how much money is in the R&D right now going on, the Kevlar company could afford a really small sum, whereas the nylon companies combined, they had around 30 times more bigger budget for research. And this, when they have realized it, this was like the essential, this was the dead end of this initiative trying to get the position back. One of their hopes was removed from the table. And so at this point, they have also recognized that there is no future in this market and they need to sell. And if they need to sell, they will have to reinvest the money they've got, because if they don't sell, or if they sell and they invest in something, let's say they have no idea about, they will lose money anyway. This led me to drawing a picture or a graph like this. This is a correlation or relationship between the risk appetite and this uncertainty or certainty of a business. Most traditional businesses tend to operate on a very low risk appetite and in a very certain businesses. This is the current business and stuff that they know. Next to the stuff those businesses know, there is the adjacent unexplored, which is slightly more risky, but still possible. And there are the big unknowns a little bit forward, and there is the no-go zone, meaning that no rational organization would go there because there's too much risk in it, and they simply don't have the appetite. If you think about the existing companies or how they really operate right now, we could probably say AWS sits on this line, Uber, Revolut, and Apple with iPhone, they were extremely risky moves, but the owners had appetite, and other companies such as NVIDIA operate probably in this particular space. So why I'm showing it, this picture? Because for any business, it's quite easy, perhaps not quite, but it is easy to jump into the adjacent unexplored, right? Because this is the space which you slightly or even more than slightly understand. The risk is not that big, and with decent amount of safeguarding, you can move into that particular space. What is never going to happen is a jump from your current business into some totally unknown territory. No board can do that, because if they fail, their career is severely limited. So if you have a company which has like a public ownership and is publicly traded, they always seem to operate in the current business space, meaning they have very little appetite to go for anything which is outside of their comfort zone. Now, the stuff here, irrational, it doesn't mean that this is wrong. It just means that if you want to jump in this space, you have to have big risk appetite, and you have to be willing to lose everything that you have. And unfortunately, or fortunately, this is rarely the case. So since they have recognized that they have to sell, we had to figure out what can they do with the money. Where is the opportunity for them to grow into? Where is the adjacent unexplored? And we had to expand the scope of the mapping exercise. Today, when I think about it, I think we have made a massive mistake starting from the company itself. We should have started with the entire landscape, because not expanding the scope or focusing on a very limited piece, they have been talking about, could lead to a local optimum. And I think I was very lucky on that particular workshop that there was no local optimal solution, because if there was one, we would have probably ended with it. So we started thinking about what else can be done with Kevlar. And the most surprising answer was, you know, Chris, we want to sell this part of the company, but we are doing other stuff with Kevlar too. Wow, that was quite a revelation. That wasn't meant to be a part of the workshop in the beginning, but they were willing to explore that part with me only because there was no idea, they had no idea how to proceed with this small triangle. So the rest of the workshop, I'm talking right now, we were probably at the 6th hour of an 8-hour workshop. Majority of time was spent into debating whether the dead end is really a dead end, and whether they really have to sell the company. They have accepted that fact. So they have told me they have other factories or other parts, and they are actively researching the electricity production. This is actually quite funny. I'm not sure if you have heard about it, but if you have Kevlar clothes are capable of generating electricity out of the movement. And this electricity could be used to power some personal devices. So it's a pretty promising direction. They also told me that they were building protective equipment. This is the sort of the military protective equipment that you can see sometimes in the movies, and if you are less fortunate on the streets. They've also told me that they were building shoes, or at least components for shoes, because Kevlar shoes are apparently trendy and very useful. And they've mentioned that they were building bike tires and monocoque bodies. Now, I've never heard the term monocoque body, and it looked very interesting because they've positioned it more or less in this particular place, which is custom / product, which means it has a little bit of potential. So monocoque body, turns out, is a single shell body that you use to build cars, planes, drones, And it's a kind of the body which has no frame inside, and all the tensions are handled by the skin, by a thin layer of material, Kevlar in this side, which is capable of protecting what is inside and handling tensions and making sure that the entire mechanism, whether it's a car, plane, or anything, doesn't break in flight. So we started pushing a little bit more because electricity production, it's in the Genesis space. Those looked like end-user products, so they had only organic growth available. Clothes were a closing market, and protective equipment was fairly standard commodity market. So monocoque bodies look promising, and they have told me that they have some capabilities in this particular space, and they are actually building or providing materials to build 3 different things: sailplanes, drones, and cars. Now, this is all the knowledge they had. They just didn't consider it to be important for their strategy. So at this moment, we practically abandoned thinking about this part of the map, and we have focused on those 3 areas, and we started thinking which of those can grow in the future. And this was the bit which required their research. This was also the end of the workshop. We have came to the conclusion that if they want to reinvest the money they will get from selling this part of the company, they need to know whether this is any of those components is worth investing in, and if it is, how much they want to invest in, because literally there is no any other possibility for them to use those money in a rational way. They will have to do small bets or play in or behave like a venture capitalists investing into small startups with a great risk, which they weren't really prepared for. So they hoped there is other way. So a week later, we had a call to summarize where we have arrived to and what they are going to do. And this is what they have told me a week later. It was like this. This market is still small, but it's growing rapidly, and it will be good for us to get in it. This market, because of the electric cars revolution, also seems to be growing. And why? Because metal bodies for cars are heavy, and heavy cars require a lot of energy. So car manufacturers will pay almost any price for a way to lower the weight of a car. So actually, providing monocoque bodies to those providers could be an extremely lucrative business. And this market, it can be so big that it's worth for us to enter this space. So we consider it to be a direction, and the direction was that they are going to sell this part of the company and they are going to invest everything in the monocoque bodies production. Now, I don't like running workshops in which the conclusion is of this caliber, because the map would tell those people that they need to sell the company and invest everything they have into this new business. This actually was a little bit difficult, and I wasn't comfortable with this decision. I think neither were they. So what we have started to do, we started to looking into more details in terms of how the sale of the company could look like and how the entering this new market can look like. And I think those were the 2 most important exercises that we did during one phone call. And frankly, we didn't get plenty of maps, because there wasn't a lot of things to map, but rather there were actions that they needed to take. So we have translated this map into following set of actions. they need to separate Kevlar production because it is being used by boat line, by clothes, and by monocoque bodies. So they need to separate the Kevlar production, start due diligence because they want to sell the company, but due diligence process takes 3 to 6 months, so they will have plenty of time. And the next group of actions was, what do we know about monocoque bodies? And this was a pretty interesting exercise because they have figured out they know something, but not a lot. And they need to hire designers, attend some fairs to build relationship with car manufacturers. They need to invest a lot in marketing, build relationships with producers, I'm repeating myself, and help the producers to embrace monocoque bodies. And why I'm saying this? I'm saying this because this market was about to grow for this company. So it was in this company interest to educate everyone here what are the benefits of using this niche technology and why everyone should be adopting it as soon as possible. And this was the end of the workshop, the end of the, I think, first phone call. So we have, through the use of Wardley Mapping, we have overcome the analysis paralysis in which they were stuck for like 2 years. What was really interesting for me was the feedback that I got after the workshop, because it varied a lot, and I think it wasn't very favorable. The first person said, I have learned a lot about my company. The background here is that this was like the most senior technician in the company. He knew a lot about processes, about technology, about customers, but had no idea about what are the strategic challenges of the company. The CEO told me something like this: we knew all of this, we expected a strategic breakthrough. And I have to admit, I'm kind of guilty of inducing a similar thinking in plenty of people, especially when I was starting my adventure with Wardley Mapping. I thought that Wardley Maps add a lot of strategic insights into corporate gameplays. So if you apply a Wardley Mapping to any scenario, you can figure out some expert strategy moves which were otherwise unthinkable. And this actually called me out because they were deadly right. I haven't introduced any new knowledge to the company except for Wardley Mapping, but through a very, I would say, rigorous process of mapping, we have discovered what's going to happen with their business and where do they have opportunities. And the last category of feedback, it was more like this: it was worth discussing those things. It's always good to spend time on it. And this piece of feedback was delivered by the chief financial officer, which I found in the beginning very difficult to deal with, because this person was stuck. This person was stuck with selling this particular part of business with profit. Actually, today, when I think about it, what we've got a group of people so fixated on a small fraction of the entire landscape that they didn't even try to analyze the big picture and figure out if we cannot play here, where else we should be playing. Yep. So to summarize this engagement, it all started with an entry point. The company was already in the process of making a decision, but they were stuck because of multiple resets and fear of failure, which was perfectly understandable. What we have done, we have analyzed one by one their scenarios they were considering as plausible, and we have eliminated them. Then we have evaluated how their environment looks like, so it's actually going backwards results in terms of what Wardley Mapping advocates, but we have evaluated the environment and we have found a few opportunities in the environment. And at the end, we have created very small, not experiments, but actions which were safe to fail. They didn't have to sell the company to embrace this new business, but when they have figured out, but they could sell the company exactly when they were expected to build enough of knowledge about those new opportunities. And a year later, they have told me that they went with the plan, and it was a good plan, which made up for all those comments, and I actually find it to be a good workshop. This is all what I have prepared for today. Any questions, comments, thoughts? When I think about this presentation, about this engagement, I'm not sure what are your experiences in this particular space, but mine are that I actually face two kinds of customers. There are people who are struggling with the decision, and they have evaluated all the micro scenarios of what may happen, or almost all. We rarely add any new knowledge to those people. We rather structure them. We rather structure the discussion so they can build a shared understanding. And the other group is that are people who aren't actually willing to embrace Wardley mapping. They just want to jump into action, as Eric was describing. And that group I find a little bit more difficult to deal with. Yeah. Okay, how would I approach this again? That's a really good question. I would expand. I would build the landscape first, because what they did and what I fell for was this focus on sell or not to sell. And this was a mistake on my side, because as I have learned later, they had not just one business line, but a couple of them, and they could reuse money from selling one line in other spaces, but it was the question of finding out which of those other business lines is worth investing in. Rick, your comment is very much on spot. I wasn't able to put it in that way, but you are right. It was a change of mindset from sell, don't sell to what are our options. This is so good that I will write it down, because I have a few other projects where I put myself in the position do or don't instead of what are our options. Thank you. And Rick, I could build up on that, because later, much later, when I was running remote workshops, because this was done in person, we have actually started applying this approach to evaluating options. And this is, and again, this is a name that I probably shouldn't be using too loudly, but I'm pretty much influenced by Nassim Taleb anti-fragility. And this is where we start with mapping the situation as it is right now. And we try to essentially place those options, which are inexpensive in execution, but will either reveal us a lot of knowledge about the field, or perhaps promise some results. But if they fail, nothing really happens. Anish, thank you for your kind words. So I'm cheating a little bit, because what you are seeing are maps prepared for the presentation. My work maps, they aren't so pretty. John, am I philosophical?
No, I almost forgot my question or my reflection, but I think you mentioned the how to get those action-oriented people on board. That maybe that's harder. I share that observation. If you get those people who have the model in their brain, if you get them sort of on your side, that's really, really important, because then your map will be so much better, because some people have this intuitive capability of map things in their head, but they're not always so good at communicating it. But if you can get them sort of on your side, and you get them to realize that, hey, this is really good stuff, then the whole exercise will be so much easier, and that will make it easier to get those skeptics on board as well, because you get to something which feels real, because it is real, because the domain experts are doing the job for you, so to speak.
This is a very good comment, and actually I have seen it also a couple of times where people really they say that they knew this, but they weren't able to express what they knew, and this is perhaps, I mean, one of the biggest value of Wardley mapping, that you teach people how to show their mental models, and it creates discussions. So yeah, good stuff. Manish.
But to John's point about being more philosophical, yeah, maybe it's reflective, if you can call that philosophical, or meta, or maybe that's philosophical. Yeah, I'm gonna leave now. Manish, please.
Yeah, hey Chris, a question is looking at this feedback looks like people undermine the efforts and hard work that are brought in, maybe don't give credit or have not. I'm not just generalizing things, but we knew all this and you just came in and showed just the first door and all other doors we have opened, right? Do you see some of those things happening? Like, I'm not talking about frequency, but when people having those biases that, yeah, we knew all this and you get less of the credit sometimes.
So I mean, I'm not okay. I will be honest. Frankly, sometimes it burns when they undermine what I'm bringing to the workshop. But on the other hand, I'm usually the least knowledgeable person in the room, and they already have the knowledge. So what I started doing, I think, from this presentation is that I openly acknowledge that I'm I'm playing the facilitator role. Perhaps I will show them a few patterns if the situation will require this, but they are the experts. And the only thing that I'm there to do is to cause healthy conflicts over a map. Right? And since then, I think I've got a slightly better feedback, because people understand that, the value is in the process and in the structure and in the open conversations.
Yeah, and also you mentioned that you were not happy about the decision to sell
Yeah.
clothing, right? And so maybe as a facilitator also, you have a point of view to say. So it is not just that you're bringing cartography as a skill or being a facilitator, but in that process, you're also putting your point of view based on what you have learned in the workshop. So I think although these feedbacks don't directly point uh, towards the hard work that you have done, I think there is a lot of credit due for that. Amazing use case. Thank you. And thank you for acknowledging that the underlying underpinning maps are very complex and you have simplified it, because I think you remember one of the tweets when you said that one of the company selling the design of ventilator or open sourcing it or moving it for free. I was impressed, but then your meaning I was very happy with that decision, but it was just two, 3 line maps and you have drawn a different parallels, a different insight from that. For example, the company by doing so will shed its responsibility from producing and fulfilling the demand. And it would say those who have the design can produce, don't tell us that we were the bottleneck in the process. So many of those insights came from very simple maps. And I think although the underpinning maps could be very complicated or complex, you have always made it simple enough to bring your story forward very effectively?
Thank you, Manish. I'm afraid I'm turning myself into a storyteller. And this is more like taking a people on journey with me and using those maps to sell ideas to people and communicate in a clearer way, because I'm a terrible speaker and maps seem to complement my natural or make up for my inability to speak.
No, I think communication is not just words or grammar. I think you have put up a lot of insights in a very powerful way. And other question I have is you have all levels of people working in your workshop, brainstorming and interacting, and from C-suite to down. From your experience from different workshops, have you any time experienced two conflicting cults, like they are fighting each other, and you had to really bring some of your skills as facilitators to say, hey, let's break the deadlock
Okay,
and talk
so,
about
so
the map. Yeah.
yeah, so I have seen that, and I have to admit that it wasn't me who figured out what was the problem, because I rarely get conflicts inside a group. I mean, conflicts that have like two decisions, because in the beginning of the workshops, I always say that there is no right or wrong, and if you have a difference of opinions, that requires preparing an experiment to figure out which of those is the right way to go. But what I have experienced once in a workshop was a person during a meeting which um, which had slightly different background than the rest of the board, and this person was responsible for a unit which, if the company took the best strategic route they could take, this particular unit would be severely downscaled. And this person was actively working against the entire session, and nobody in the room acknowledged the situation. And I suspect the reason was that this person, so perhaps this is a wrong word, but this person couldn't see that this particular unit will be downscaled in the future. So it was set as almost like a scapegoat to run this particular unit, because if something bad happens, it will not be one of us, right? And this was where there was a conflict that I failed to recognize. My co-facilitator picked it up and made it explicit, guys. What's going on here, right? Because this isn't the discussion that we should be having. And then they have revealed who is responsible for what and what will happen. And this explicit, or making the conflict of interest explicit, revealed or allowed the workshop to proceed. So that's a really good question. Really,
Yeah. But do is there a way to map that conflict of interest?
I don't think so. We have
Okay,
to
but yeah, thank you, Chris, for your insight.
finish. Loco, it's good to have you here. Rick,
Hey, so my question is kind of in the frame of I'll use the buzzwords, output versus outcomes, right? So, and I think I see like the feedback you got, and also the way the thing was originally framed, and in how you say what did we accomplish in this session. I think like the output mindset is you're framing this as a decision was made, right? So we made the decision, whatever. But that's a bit of an output. Like what I think is the problem here is the session framing, at least as you described to us, and also the what did we accomplish, right? Framing that in an outcome mindset, right? Not a mindset, in actually outcome. So an outcome is in a change of behavior, right? That's like behavior has changed, and that's going to lead us towards a future impact of success. So here's evidence we're having this problem, this behavior is happening, and it's stopping us from getting to, or it's, and so we want to see a change in behavior in our organization that will get us to more success. So I don't want to put words, like I just want to try and frame, how would you describe what they believe the intended outcome was, And then how would you describe, if you frame this, say, here's what we accomplished, here's the outcome we accomplished, and here's how that's going to lead us to our impact. Could you put that in words for us?
Oh, so now you've opened a very, very interesting challenge, and this is one that I have been battling for a really long time. And you have essentially touched a very big issue, which is how do you sell Wardley Mapping? Because this is exactly the challenge, because we can deliver or we can sell a Wardley Mapping session, a situational awareness session, but what usually it gets you either expectations that you will become some evil strategic genius, and which then, if they are confronted with what you know after the session, they are really that big. And what you have just asked is whether, or how I read it, is whether there is a way to tell them upfront what will change in their behavior, and so they know what to look at. And I mean, you have framed it pretty well. It's a changed behavior in this particular situation. I think somebody put it earlier in the chat. It was a change of thinking from sell or don't sell to what are our options. So we basically provided them the ability to make decisions in this highly uncertain environment, or the ability to scan the environment for opportunities acceptable for them. Right. But it wasn't sold that way.
So yeah, I think that's what I'm saying is, so that's what you gave them, was this ability, but that's kind of an output. So what I was like, if you actually can bring it back up to, let's talk about how Wardley mapping is how, right? Yes. And it's kind of open. So what I'm saying is, if you actually frame you framed the situation early on very well, and I'm not sure you realize that you framed it in an outcome. They were having negative outcomes, negative behaviors that were blocking them, and they were missing outcomes. So you said they had gone 2 years back and forth, not being able to make a choice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this back and forth 2 years, not being able to make a choice, not being able to like push forward on that choice. Like if you say, this is where we're stuck in circles, right? So this is a behavior. It really exists. Now, after this session, they were not able, not only to, it's not just make that choice, right? But they knew what to do. They had the options on how to follow through with that choice. This was not a paper choice. This was a choice that they knew how to follow through on to get their strategic impact, their goal. So if you look at now, you could get about, what was our goal? Our goal is, to make a business decision and choose how to make that more profitable for us in the future, right? And to know that's going to lead towards profit, right? To higher profit. So that's our impact, right? So if you just say outcome, this is like that output, outcome, impact. Outcome is change of behavior. So this making strategic decisions that we can follow through on, right? That we actually have actionable follow throughs on points, right? An actionable way to follow through is the outcome you're looking for.
Strategy.
Right? And so that's the strategic, but that's really what they will be able to do. So yes, they knew all that stuff, but this time they did something about it.
Oh, so if I understand you correctly, there's another challenge that I have with setting proper outcomes, because what was the outcome of this workshop? It was like a real strategy. They knew where is their uncertainty. They knew what are the opportunities, threats, and they had an idea how they are going to explore the environment in order to find or to improve their situation.
Right, but that's all the things they had. The outputs it gave them was they knew the environment didn't work. The outcome is how they used it. That's what matters. It's not that I know this map and I can explain the map. It's now, how are they making decisions? Look at how you just made a decision today and how you're making decisions going forward. With knowledge, you have this process and you make this decision and you know how to follow through on that decision. That consensus, that strategic decision is a real decision, not a decision that's going to go overturned when someone has doubts tomorrow or loses the plot. So this is a strategic decision that you're, as a group, capable of following through on. And here's evidence of that. Here's your behaviors. Here's what you've done differently. That's the magic. Outcomes. This is where I've learned these buzzwords actually have better meaning, like the output, outcome, impact, right? And so what's impact is that going to give us? We're going to navigate more quickly to better profits through these decisions, right? That's what we want to do, right? And we're going to be able to follow through on our choices is behaviors, right? Because that's going to keep us more focused and make us better profit, right? So outcomes are behaviors, outputs are what we do. This map is an output. And it's no good unless it gives us an outcome. And that outcome is a leading indicator of future impact, which we have no control of. So that's kind of the magic chain. And so if you're using Wardley mapping correctly, right, then you're using it in a situation where you are able to change strategic behavior. Otherwise, it's a waste, right? Otherwise, you're just misapplying it. And so that's really this, what's the behavior that we want to change as an organization? And what's that behavior change going to give us?
Yes.
Right? Otherwise, there's no, why am I using this new tool to get no benefit? Right.
Very
so
well said.
That's kind of what you know, in this situation, I'll leave that as probably an exercise thinking, but you could probably describe in hindsight, you know, hindsight 2020, and now you talk to your people, like, okay, here's what we achieved together. Now we are able to do this, right? We were doing it. We were, not only were we able to do it once, but we're able to repeatedly do this. And what's that going to give us? Because we have all these assumptions. As we go through it to the next step, we're going to learn something new and have to, readjust the situation and make a decision. So my goal is, like, not only did you do it once, but now as you move that next step, when you learn some stuff, if you readjust the map and make decisions based on this pattern, then we've won. Yep. And if you hit a point where you're struggling and that's not happening, give me a call. Right?
Exactly.
It's not always obvious, and then I can get you unstuck, and pretty soon you'll never need me, right?
That's the promise. That's the promise.
So that's kind of that's the value. The map is not the value, and it's really hard to get that. And so now you have a good example. Now, if you flip back and you sell it, if you want to sell it, right? Usually you sell it on past. This story is a past. They were stuck in a decision. Now, not only did they break through that decision, but they have a pattern for future decisions as they learn more. So you can actually talk about now when they get into that, like if you can actually keep an eye on that story and do that next step. Now, when they go dug into it, they realize some things. If you can get that second level story, now you've changed their behavior, which is navigating them to profit. That's a sellable story that I suggest. You're very close to having that example, not just one decision where I hold your hand, but you've learned how to make strategic decisions in a way that's in your best interest.
Very useful comments. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry for taking so much time.
So we have 5 minutes to the next session. Thank you all for being patient with me and for all the comments that you have said. Hopefully see you soon.
Thank you, Chris. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.